If everyone will take their seat. Good morning. Good morning on this truly glorious morning. I can say with absolute certainty that this is the coolest morning the Academy has ever met on. McDowell Lee went into the legislature at the same time that Albert Brewer did. He served there 8 years. He was then elected unanimously to be the Secretary of the Senate of our state. He has become one of the truly accomplished leaders in legislative process, having written 2 books. We are honored that this morning McDowell Lee will deliver the invocation.
Let us pray. Our Heavenly Father, as we gather to honor these great Alabamians, we respectfully request that you give them health and happiness and all of their friends and family. Look after all of those of us here today, and we request that you give your allegiance to helping us have peace and harmony in our world today. In closing, we ask that let us walk humbly, deal justly, and love mercy in our sight. Amen.
Governor Riley has a perfect record for attending these sessions since he became governor, and that is very good because most of the time he is traveling. He is the most traveled governor we've ever had, except when we had one running for president. That's a form of humor that may come out, and it'd be better if you laughed. All right. Governor Riley will say our welcome and comments.
After 6 years, now you tell me it's optional to be here. Of everything that I do every year, there's nothing that I look more forward to than this. You know, I'm like every other politician in the state of Alabama, with the exception of our great speaker here, but I take credit for all of the great things that happen in Alabama. But when you come to this academy, you begin to understand. It's not us. It's not the elected officials. It is the people of Alabama that make Alabama the greatest state in this union. And I don't say that only to pander to Alabamians today. It truly is. When you compare what Alabama is doing today and has done in the past, Alabama has reached the point today because of a great foundation that has existed, that Alabama is becoming the state that other states want to emulate. When I looked today at the 3 recipients, if you want to know why Alabama's doing well, it's because we're doing things that we've never done before. We're doing them differently than we have ever done them before. Economic development is great, but when you look at the accomplishments that we have today, in education, 3 people that are going to receive the awards today are as much responsible for that level of reform, that level of excellence that we have in our education system today. They are as responsible as anyone has ever been. That's what's making a difference. It's when people take of their own time to give back to this state, even at a personal sacrifice. That's what moves Alabama forward. That's what makes us different. That's what allows us to reach that level of excellence. To all of you, congratulations. but to the 3 this year, on behalf of all of the children that you'll never meet, thank you for what you do. Thank you very much.
We have some very distinguished guests today. They're not guests. This is their room as well as ours, even more so. Earlier this year, a bill was passed which made the work of the Academy much simpler, much easier, much cheaper, much more efficient. That was passed by the legislature at a time when few bills were being passed at all. Seth Hammett, our speaker, Seth Stan, was one of those deeply involved. Is Demetrius Newton here? He's not. Send him our best regards. Paul DeMarco in the House. In the Senate side, we had Lowell Barron, we had Jabbo Wagner, we had Frank Brown. Where's Frank Brown? Frank back there works for the archives. He is the best lobbyist I've ever dealt with. He lived over here for about 3 months because it was very touchy whether our bill would go through. Frank and Ed Bridges, whom you hear from shortly, and many others, we're most grateful. I had hoped that the Chief Justice would be here. She may be trying someone. Is Beth Chapman here? All right, our state auditor, Samantha Shaw. Kay Ivey has a representative here. She is out campaigning John Hanson. Ron Sparks. You've met McDowell Lee, Greg Pappas, Clerk of the House, Jim Main. Governor, you should let Jim Main off so he can attend this meeting. All right, sorry, thank you. Thank you. Jim Main is the Chief Financial Officer, and he is a pleasure to work with. He never gives you the money you want, but he always smiles. Bill Newton, State Budget Director. Joe Morton. Joe Morton is here. All right. Okay. Joe is head of the state schools K through 12 and does a great job, one of the finest superintendents we've ever had. If I've left anyone out, please let me know. I want to read the members who are in attendance today. Some may not be here. If you just stand or raise your hand or say here, Gail Andrews. If Gail comes here, she's head of the museum in Birmingham. She is in charge of an exhibit there on Leonardo da Vinci, created by her and her staff. It's the only time it's been out of Italy. It's one of the finest exhibits ever shown anywhere. Leah Atkins, Tom Bartlett, Tom, Ann Bedsoe, Ann, Regina Benjamin, Regina is a survivor of how many hurricanes? 3. Albert Brewer, Ed Bridges, Bill Cabnis, Mason Davis, Ollie Delchamps, Wayne Flint. Is Wayne here? Yes. Wayne, how many hits have you had to your Encyclopedia of Alabama this month? That's fabulous, fabulous. Emery Fulmar, Mike Goodrich, Milagore, Fred Gray, Jimmy Harrison, James Head. On October 20, 1904, Mr. Head was born. Basil Hershowitz, Sandrell Hewlett, Tom James, Ted Kennedy, Harper Lee, Scotty McCallum, Joe McCorkadale, Bill Muse, John Patterson. Judge has left being governor. He's left being a judge. He is now competing with Harper Lee in being an author, a writer. You've got a book out about yourself.
It's a book written by Vaughan Morrissette, published by New South Books.
All right, and you helped. Didn't you help?
Yes, I recommend it highly.
All right. Governor Riley, Yetta Sanford, Larry Striplin, Lee Steislinger, Paul Thompson, Bo Torbett, whom we'll hear about shortly, Cameron Vowell, Jack Warner. Earlier this year, thanks to the graciousness and ingenuity of Jack Warner and Susan, the members had a gathering at their home on the lake near Tuscaloosa. It was an extraordinarily nice occasion, and Jack and Susan, thank you very much. The highlight, of course, was the museum, and that's one of the great. Jack, I'm not going to let you talk about the museum because we've got a timetable.
We want you to come back.
All right, we're ready. We're ready. Mike Warren. When Mike, last year, when Mike Warren was here, he was head of Intergen. On January 1 of this year, he became CEO of Children's Hospital in Birmingham. That was on January 1. On January 2, he began raising about $500 million for the new hospital. A great triumph, and we all hope he stands up to it. We know he will. Bobby Wheel, Cordell Wynn. Anyone I left out? Well, thank all of you very much for being here. This past year, we had 4 deaths among our membership. Bill Edmonds, who was a great leader in Birmingham. He was one of the founders of BE&K. The K is for Ted Kennedy, who's over here. He helped in restoring life to the symphony in Birmingham. He was involved in numerous civic efforts. Harry Philpott, one of the most beloved presidents of Auburn, highly, highly regarded. Harry Philpott was a member of our executive committee of the Academy. And he was the one who would sit at our meetings sort of by himself because he would tally the vote. He would call the names out of all those who had been nominated, record how they were voted, and then announce who had won. He was greatly, greatly admired. Ira Myers, I think we have some of the Myers family here. No? Ira Myers was also on our executive committee. He was the principal physician of Alabama for many years. When he first assumed that position, he was the youngest person to hold that position in the United States. He was a deeply religious, deeply committed man. One of his daughters was recently inducted into the Alabama Women's Hall of Fame, and very short commemoration. And it says that she served for 23 years as a Baptist missionary in Yemen, and then it says, quote, where she was martyred. Lou Willie. We have any friends from Lou Willie? Okay. Yvonne, thank you very much, Lou. Lou Willie was one of the most popular people in Birmingham. He was sought after by every board. He learned from a master, A.G. Gaston, who was a first member, I think, one of the early members of the Academy. Lou was, everyone liked to be around him. He was regarded, one reason is because he was totally honest, not a speck of scandal, always committed. Yvonne, would you or Lou want to say anything?
I'll just say that I know that my father was very, very honored to become part of the Academy. We were very excited about it as well. And I thank you for this recognition today and recognizing his death for us.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. The Academy lives and survives because of the work of the archives. The archives does all the administrative work. It's been doing that for many years. And because of the bill that I mentioned earlier, that is now the law. We're happy because the head of the archives, Ed Bridges, is one of the strongest leaders in this state, certainly in this nation. He's regarded as the best or one of the very best directors of archives in the United States. Other states have found that out, and every now and then they try to make a foray into Alabama to steal him. We fought that off for a number of years. Ed Bridges will speak to us now on behalf of the membership.
Thank you, Tom. As members of the Academy of Honor gather here each year, I think we all have a sense of awe about this space, this room. Some of you have served here as members of the legislature. A few of you have given State of the State addresses here. Others have visited the room in the course of your involvement in public issues. But this room is part of all Alabamians' shared past. For my remarks today, I'd like to reflect for a few minutes on some of the events that have taken place here and some of the people who have preceded us in this room. On January the 7th, 1861, delegates to a special convention met in this room. Abraham Lincoln had just been elected president, and the convention delegates were to decide Alabama's response. Each man recognized the gravity of the situation. After 4 days of intense and sometimes acrimonious debate, the delegates adopted the Ordinance of Secession, as that plaque says, on January the 11th. They declared Alabama to be a sovereign and independent state. The deliberations in this room were conducted in closed session while hundreds of people waited outside and all around the grounds. William Smith of Tuscaloosa kept a journal of the debates, our major source of information on what happened in this room. Smith wrote that, quote, "When the doors were thrown open, the lobbies and the galleries were filled to suffocation in a moment. The cheering was deafening. It seemed really that there would be no end to the raptures that had taken possession of the company." Incidentally, one part of Alabama's Ordinance of Secession was a paragraph inviting other slaveholding states to send delegates to a meeting here in Montgomery on February the 4th. Their purpose would be to discuss ways of preserving their common peace and security. Thus, Alabama's Ordinance of Secession served a dual role. It declared Alabama's independence, but it also served as the official call that led to the creation of the Confederacy. 3.5 years later, in September 1864, the House was here again in regular session. Mobile Bay had just been seized by Admiral Farragut the month before. Sherman had just captured Atlanta a few weeks earlier. Alabama was in a crisis. On Tuesday, September the 27th, in this room, Representative and future Governor Lewis Parsons proposed a resolution calling for peace negotiations with the Union. Just 2 days after a lengthy debate, that motion failed by a 32 to 45 vote. Just 2 days later, Jefferson Davis showed up in Montgomery. The legislature invited him to address a joint session in this room, and at 1 o'clock on Thursday afternoon, he walked in. In his speech, he praised General Lee, and he described the horrors of what might happen if the Union prevailed, but he reassured Alabamians. He said he had coolly assessed the situation of the Confederacy and, quote, "am most confident the longer I behold the progress of the war." Just in case, however, he called for renewed war effort, and he said, "There's only one duty for every Southern man. It is to go to the front." 11 years later, in September 1875, delegates to another convention met in this room. Their purpose was to write a new constitution for Alabama. In the years after the Civil War, the state of Alabama had sought to promote economic expansion by encouraging the building of railroads. One way this was done was that the state provided guarantees to the railroad companies for all the bonds that they issued, $12,000 and then later $16,000 for each mile of track that was constructed. Through a combination of bad luck, mismanagement, and corruption, some of which also took place in this room, the state of Alabama ended up guaranteeing many miles of rail that were not built. When some of the railroads failed, the state was legally obligated for their debt. By 1875, Alabama's debt far exceeded its capacity to service. State bonds traded as low as 20 cents to the dollar. The Constitutional Convention then was called in part to address this financial crisis. The new Constitution absolutely prohibited any further government support for private businesses and any state funding for internal improvements. It capped taxes and forced draconian cuts in services. The result was low funding for education, a growing reliance on the convict lease system, and a regimen of austerity that continued into the next century. 12 years later, in the summer of 1887, Julia Tutwiler sat up in the gallery watching as legislators down here on the floor debated. Several years earlier, she had gone to the jail in Tuscaloosa to help a young servant woman who had been arrested. Seeing conditions in the jail, she was appalled and started working to help improve them. The more involved she became, the more she saw how bad conditions were statewide. Over the next few years, she became one of, if not the first women in Alabama to lobby the legislature publicly. Because of her efforts, and as she watched, the House of Representatives passed the first act in the South setting up schools inside state prisons. And buoyed by this success, Ms. Tutwiler would be back. The Constitution of 1901 was written in this room, 14 years later. It continued the tight restrictions on the powers of the state and local governments in order to keep taxes low. It also enacted an array of suffrage provisions that would drastically reduce the number of African American voters in Alabama and eliminate many poor white voters as well. The next event jumps forward to the years of the Great Depression. In her book, To Kill a Mockingbird, Nell Harper Lee described Atticus Finch as leaving Macon one summer for a special session of the legislature. She does not give the year, but Scout reported that, quote, there were sit-down strikes in Birmingham, bread lines in the cities grew longer, people in the country grew poorer. For the record, in the summer of 1932, Amasa Coleman Lee, Nell's father from Monroe County, met here in the legislature as a member of the legislature, the member of the House, with his colleagues in a special session. Governor Benjamin Meek Miller had called the session because the state was again facing bankruptcy. You all know the story. Schools were closing. Those that were open paid teachers and script. To meet this crisis, Governor Miller proposed the state's first income tax. The resolution calling for a statewide referendum on the amendment was fiercely debated through days of August heat with no air conditioning. While the resolution passed the legislature, it was rejected by Alabama voters in a subsequent referendum. After conditions became even worse through the course of that winter and early the next spring, however, voters changed their mind and they approved the new tax in August of 1933. On January 12, 1971, the House of Representatives met here again in regular session. Outgoing Governor Albert Brewer gave a visionary State of the State address, but he was to be succeeded in a few days by the newly elected George Wallace. But there was something else new. 2 African American representatives from Macon County were here. Because of court orders and the Voting Rights Act, because they had stricken down many of the old barriers of the 1901 Constitution, Thomas Reed and Fred Gray had been elected to the Alabama House of Representatives. They were the first African Americans to serve here since Reconstruction. The first induction ceremony for the Alabama Academy of Honor had taken place here just 2 years earlier on August 25th, 1969. The inductees included 4 governors, Albert Brewer, who was then in office, Jim Folsom Sr., John Patterson, and George Wallace. The 10 other members of that initial class were, in alphabetical order, Winton Blunt, who had just become Postmaster General, Coach Paul Bryant, Birmingham Insurance Executive A.G. Gaston, former U.S. Senator Lister Hill, Admiral Thomas Moorer, then Chief of U.S. Naval Operations, former University of Alabama President Frank Rose, another Birmingham Insurance Executive, Frank Samford, philanthropist and Birmingham civic leader Bertha Pizitz Smolian, Senator and 1952 Democratic nominee for Vice President John Sparkman, and Werner von Braun, who had led America's effort, completed triumphantly just the month before to land a man on the moon. These are just a few examples of a dazzling list of people who have preceded us and events that have taken place here. One could spend a lifetime studying them all. But perhaps these examples will cause us to pause and reflect for a while on the larger continuum of life in Alabama, of which we all are a part. I think the recognition of our place in the flow of history can serve as grounding in turbulent times. But more important for me, a deeper sense of understanding of history can help strengthen our feeling of community, our awareness of community. The recognition that we are all products of the past, that today we depend on each other for real success, and that we share a responsibility for the future. Many of the choices and decisions made in this room have served to divide us. Perhaps our recognition of that fact can make us more conscious of the need to build and nurture community as we look to the future. In many ways, the Alabama Academy of Honor embodies this idea of our state as a community. The Academy acknowledges and honors people who preceded us and who have people who have rendered distinguished service to Alabama, such as Vaughan Morrissette and Bill Smith and Odessa Woolfolk. Its annual meetings in this space mark another small link in the chain of connections that tie us to the past and to each other. Thank you.
One of the jobs that Barbara Larson has, she's a guest here, is lining up good speakers for Leadership Alabama. And the history spots, always Ed Bridges is at the very top. Our citations today, inducting our new members, will be read by C.C. Bo Torbert, legislator and one of our finest Chief Justices.
Thank you very much for that introduction. It's my pleasure and has been for some time to read the citations of the newly inducted members of the Alabama Academy of Honor. But before doing that, I could not help but reflect, sitting over here next to our chairman, what a wonderful history lesson our speaker gave that was almost a synopsis of the history of the state of Alabama during troublesome times, where decisions were made by elected officials, some good, some bad, some didn't work out. I remember we had a state bank at one time, and some of the old heads would remember that, and it made me worry a little bit about today's time as we began to invest our federal funds into into banks around. So hold on to your hats. Keep a good upper lip, pray for the United States of America and the process of electing its leaders. Now that is not my assignment, but just added that gratuitously. There are three inductees today. I know all of them. I have a lot of help in reading the citations, but listen carefully to our new members of the Alabama Academy of Honor. For being born in Mobile and graduating from Murphy High School and later Sweetbriar College in Virginia. For after her marriage to the late Taylor Morrissette, settling down in her hometown of Mobile, building both a wonderful family and a growing and exciting community. For being one of Alabama's busiest, and I mean busiest because I know, and most effective supporters of worthy causes, and for more than 4 decades, and for making education one of her more active fields of service. both at the lower grades and at the institutions of higher learning. For having served on the boards of several colleges and universities and on the foundation boards of the Alabama Institute for the Deaf and Blind and the Alabama School of Mathematics and Science, where she led the fund drive to build the school's state-of-the-art library. For serving on numerous boards at the state level, including the State Council of the Arts, the Women's Hall of Fame, and the Alabama Department of Archives and History. For her role in transforming American Village, I didn't know this until I read it last night, the American Village in Shelby County, by bringing national attention to that cultural and educational resource, in part by drawing on her national contacts within the Colonial Dames and the Mount Vernon Women's Association. For serving as Vice Regent and Regent of Mount Vernon, and for helping plan and lead a $100 million capital campaign to preserve President Washington's home, and dramatically upgrading its educational facilities and programs. For serving as chair of the Mobile Infirmary Medical Center Board, and for chairing the successful capital drive to build the new $15 million Museum of Arts. For devoting a large part of her life to civic membership and leadership, and for expanding the dimensions of volunteerism. For being one of Mobile's and Alabama's more gracious and dedicated goodwill ambassador, Vaughan Morrissette was elected to the Alabama Academy of Honor.
Tom said I could only speak for a minute, and that's just kind of tough for me because I do like to talk. First of all, I would like to say thanks to all the members of the Academy who elected me. But the best is that a lot of the men have called and said, Vaughan, welcome to the Old Boys Club. And I said, that's the best thing that ever happened, because for a poor old widow to be invited to the Old Boys Club is about the best thing that can happen. Thank you.
What a wonderful response to that honor bestowed upon that young lady. The next citation, I read, for being a native of Birmingham, graduating from Ramsey High School there, and then earning a degree from Washington and Lee University in Virginia. For having served his country for 2 years as a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army Infantry, earning and then later earning an MBA from Harvard. That's a little diversity there, I must say. I didn't write this, I'm reading it. For returning to the family business after graduate school and serving as CEO of Royal Cup Coffee from 1968 to 1996, when he became chairman, and for understanding that the role of a truly successful executive extends beyond the boardroom and into the community. For serving as director and then chair of the University of Alabama at Birmingham Health System, and for greatly expanding that hospital system. For helping create the Public Affairs Research Council of Alabama, a respected, nonpartisan source of data about many aspects of our wonderful state. For co-founding Leadership Birmingham and 8 years later, Leadership Alabama, and for lending his visionary leadership to both groups, for helping fund the A+ Foundation, a coalition promoting progressive educational reform, and for his continued efforts to make improvements in our state's educational systems, for a distinguished record of business success and visionary community leadership, and for his efforts to make Alabama a better place for all of us, William E. Smith, Jr. was elected to the Alabama Academy of Honor.
I don't have anything really that is possible for me to say. The men and women of this academy are my role model heroes. And from the day that I came back to Alabama in 1968, you all have shown us the way to make this state a place where we can raise our children and grandchildren with pride and optimism for the future. It's with deep honor and very great gratitude that I join you, and I look forward to being a part of the Academy. Thank you.
Two down and one to go. For being born in Titusville community of Birmingham, and for graduating from the famed A.H. Parker High School, for earning a B.A. degree in History and Political Science at Talladega College, and an M.A. in Urban Studies at Occidental College in California, with additional graduate study at the University of Chicago and Yale University, where she was a National Urban Fellow. For a teaching career that began in Birmingham's Earlman High School, for public policy work that carried her to Washington, D.C. and New York, for returning to Alabama in the 1970s as Executive Director of the Birmingham Opportunity Industrial Relations Center and Associate Executive Director of the Jefferson County Committee for Economic Opportunity. For serving for 21 years at the University of Alabama at Birmingham as Director of the Center for Urban Affairs, lecturer in political science, and public affairs staff associate at the Center for International Studies and assistant to the President for Community Relations. For being recognized with the Odessa Woolfolk Presidential Community Service Award upon her retirement from UAB in 1993. For service on the boards of dozens of civic, community, corporate, and public organizations. For being honored by the Mayor and City Council with induction into the Birmingham Gallery of Distinguished Citizens. For being the driving force behind the building of the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, an internationally recognized museum that depicts the struggles and the victories of the American Civil Rights Movement. For her outstanding leadership abilities, commitments to education, and work in public policy, and the countless other contributions to her community and state, Odessa Woolfolk was elected to the Alabama Academy of Honor. Odessa.
Good morning, or is it afternoon now? It's been a long 2 days, but enjoyable. First, I do want to thank some people who are here from the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, and there are other guests who are here. I was told not to take the time to name everybody, but those of you who have had anything to do with the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute in the past or present or future, hold your hands up. See that, Lawrence Pigeot, Andrew Hall, Dr. Ethel Hall, all of whom have had official positions at the Institute. You too, Mason. Governor Riley, former governors, Speaker, other elected officials, appointed officials, former members of the Academy's representatives, members of the Academy, and guests. We all know Tom Carruthers as a witty and wise fellow. And Tom has a playful seriousness about him. When you get a call from Tom, you never know what to expect. One day, Tom left a message on my answering machine saying that he and Mason Davis wanted to talk with me about a very important matter. Now, Mason is a longtime friend, and as June knows, we never know what Mason is going to say either. So I imagined that the two of them were calling about some kind of fund drive or opportunity, Vaughan, for some civic duty. So I returned this call. Tom, in his attorney-like gravitas, asked if I had heard of the Alabama Academy of Honor. Sure, I said. That's a real great bunch of people. Then he continued, somewhat somberly, we invite you to be a member of the class of 2008. Well, I was speechless, which is hard for my colleagues to imagine. But I did thank Tom and the Academy for the recognition. Then he added, and you will make brief remarks for your class. And he said, by brief, I mean 7 or 8 minutes. I'll try. So I'm here. First, I really do sincerely thank the members of the Academy for admitting me to the group. And it's really an added pleasure to share this induction ceremony with Vaughan Morrissette and Bill Smith, my Leadership Alabama colleagues, and Barbara's fan club. Community service really is important to me. I graduated from a small liberal arts college that believes an educated citizen has a responsibility not only to practice his or her craft, but also to make the community a more humane place where justice and equality prevail. I ask you to indulge me in a personal story. A group of Birmingham Southern students once asked me to comment on the wellspring of my deep interest in human rights. Here is what I said to them. The obvious connection is that I grew up in Alabama when it was not, from my perspective, a civil society. But there were eye-opening encounters outside of Birmingham, which, as it turned out, were training ground for my returning, happily, to Alabama. I mentioned Talladega College. I was inspired, as Mason and June were, by several of our college professors who spoke of citizenship in a worldwide historical context. Professors who, as children, had fled Nazi Germany were most profound in their analysis of the relationship between leaders and those who are led. They related the well-known story of Pastor Friedrich Niemöller, then head of the largest church in Germany. You know the story. As the story goes, Pastor Niemöller, although an opponent of Nazism, initially did little to help those persecuted. And the persecuted included Jews, labor leaders, intellectuals, and artists. When at last the stormtroopers came for him, he knew that through his own fault, no one was left to hear his cries for help. Clearly, he missed an opportunity for leadership. A second influence which helped me to find a voice was attending the Race Relations Institute at Fisk University in Nashville. There, some of America's most distinguished social scientists and activists, along with participants from many races, faiths, ages, and socioeconomic backgrounds, pondered the sometimes disconnect between the American creed and its practice in everyday life. The consensus there was that ordinary people, ordinary citizens, can provoke change, and that the great man theory is really a myth. My thinking about civic engagement was reinforced during my residency in International House, Ethel, you know about that place, on the campus of the University of Chicago. There, we graduate students from democratic and non-democratic societies around the world viewed our obligations as individuals in society. We held late-night sessions about the necessity and consequences of public comment about issues that mattered to the community at large. And also, in addition to all of these experiences, I do believe that we are not as our Creator intended until we seek what we can do for another. So I returned to Alabama, my home, to seek a career in public service, and I am glad that I did that, Governor. Alabama is a Choctaw word, we know, meaning clearer of the thicket. In the late 1960s, when the academy was started, the state had just entered the, I guess, Ed, the new South. Or maybe it was a new South. It was the aftermath of the civil rights movement. Since then, many thickets of social and economic stalemate have been cleared. Our state has made remarkable progress in medicine, engineering, agriculture, public service, industry, higher education, and the list goes on and on. Thanks to many in this hall, we've made that progress. Now, we could make even more progress in the overall quality of life, in my view, were we to fix our flawed Constitution, the 1901. The 1901 Constitution, one of unfairness, as Ed has talked about, lopsided power, and antiquated rules. I think it needs a little pruning. I agree with historian Harvey Jackson, who wrote, "To change the Constitution, Alabamians will have to confront the past, and if the past is found wanting, chart a new direction for the future." And I really believe, we in this academy have the power to do that. My dream for our state is for every child to live in a caring community with excellent schooling, wholesome and safe places to live and play, jobs for adults, and affordable housing and health care for all people. The good news, and it is good news, is that many of our schools and colleges are introducing students to the notion of community responsibility. There's a book I would recommend to you on a reading list at UAB. It's called Soul of a Citizen, living with conviction in a cynical time. Now, I don't know whether you consider these cynical times. I try to be more optimistic than cynical. But this is a kind of activism that's demonstrated by Vaughan Morrissette in her untiring advocacy for the arts, or Bill Smith in the kind of activism he showed when he spent untiring amounts of time and energy getting A+ started. I'm speaking of a kind of civic activism that is nonpartisan and non-sectarian. It really is not particular to any profession or management style or ethnic group. It's just everybody's job. Loeb reminds us in Soul of a Citizen that the ancient Greeks used the word idiot for people incapable of involving themselves in civic life. Well, there are no idiots in this room. Finally, Professor Charles Chuck Willey, Yvonne Willey's brother-in-law, spoke to Leadership Birmingham a few years ago about community. Chuck Willey said, "There is no community unless some members are generous and give more than their fair share." The members of the Alabama Academy of Honor certainly meet high standards of giving of themselves to community. The collective light cast by this diverse group of 100 people illuminates the state. So, on behalf of Vaughan and Bill, we are proud to join the class of 2008 of the Academy. Thank you.
Thank you, Odessa. Thank you, new inductees. Our reception is in the room immediately behind me, and the way you get to it is you go through that door and up some stairs. If any of you don't want to go upstairs, go outside, and there'll be archives people who will take you on a tour, elevators, Ed Bridges, right, and take you right back to where you want to go. I jotted down some notes when Odessa was speaking and when Ed was speaking and when the governor was speaking. And all of you will be happy to know that I think we will have those next year. Thank you. We're adjourned. Hang on.
We missed it at our reception at the archives.
We're not home yet. We're getting there. We're making progress.
We like that. Let's put the man between us. Oh, we'll share him. We'll share him. I never know what it's like.
She obviously didn't have. Thank you.
Not needed.
How you doing today? We wouldn't be doing. You're doing.